100 square feet. That is all it takes. No land, no sunlight, no season to wait for. Just a spare room, some agricultural waste, and a living organism that has been perfecting its craft for 700 million years. What you are about to discover is a cultivation system so overlooked and so disproportionately profitable that a single 10 by 10 foot space can out-earn an entire acre of farmland. Not by a little, by a factor of 1,000. In 1989, a mycologist named Paul Stamets quietly published a spiral-bound cultivation manual. It circulated among researchers, foragers, and a small underground network of growers who understood exactly what it contained. A step-by-step blueprint for turning empty rooms into year-round production facilities. The conventional agriculture industry took one look at those numbers and did what industries always do when something threatens the existing supply chain. They looked the other way. Today, that blueprint gets opened right here. This is the indoor money farm, and the math behind it will change how anyone over 55 thinks about income, independence, and what a spare room is actually worth. Part 1. The Secret History and the Agricultural Illusion. What if the most productive farming system in history never required a single acre of land? That is not a hypothetical, it is documented fact, and the timeline stretches back further than most people realize. As early as 600 AD, Chinese cultivators were growing wood ear mushrooms on carefully selected logs. By the Song dynasty, a farmer named Wu Sanquang had documented a precise inoculation technique for shiitake on oak, a method so effective that versions of it are still in use over 1,000 years later. Through the Edo period in Japan, these methods were refined into a full-scale rural industry. Entire communities were harvesting hundreds of pounds per season from managed forest plots. The yields dwarfed anything their neighbors produced from traditional grain crops. And the inputs? Almost nothing. No tillable land, no irrigation infrastructure, no purchased seed. Mushrooms were not a garnish in these cultures. They were a primary crop, calorie-dense, protein-rich, medicinally significant. So here is the question that should bother every gardener who has spent decades breaking their back over soil. Why did this knowledge never reach mainstream Western agriculture? When American agricultural scientists finally studied commercial mushroom production in the 1970s and 1980s, what they discovered was staggering. The yields per square foot exceeded virtually every other food crop on Earth. A Pennsylvania button mushroom operation was generating more revenue per acre than massive Midwest corn farms, and it required no acres at all, just a building. The USDA published reports. University extension programs documented the economics. And then, nothing. The research was not banned. No dramatic conspiracy unfolded. The knowledge was simply unfunded, underpromoted, and left to gather dust. Because here is the uncomfortable truth. Indoor mushroom cultivation does not require seeds, fertilizer, pesticides, or heavy machinery. It does not require the products that the agricultural supply chain exists to sell. The economics speak for themselves, and they speak loudly. A successful wheat operation returns roughly $300 to $500 per acre annually. Premium specialty crops like blueberries might reach $5,000 to $15,000 per acre in a strong year. Now consider this, and these numbers deserve a moment to land. A well-managed indoor oyster mushroom operation running on vertical racks in a 10 by 10 foot room, just 100 square feet, produces 800 to 1,200 pounds of mushrooms per year. At direct-to-consumer pricing of $12 to $18 per pound, that tiny space generates $9,600 to $21,600 annually. Converted to a per-acre equivalent, indoor oyster mushroom production reaches $4 million to $9 million. No vineyard touches that. No greenhouse operation. No hydroponic lettuce facility. And the startup cost? Not a farm loan. Between $500 and $3,000. For decades, most growers accepted a fundamental limitation. Big harvests require big land. But biology tells a different story. Sometimes the most extraordinary yields come not from wide-open fields, but from quiet, controlled, focused spaces. The substrate that makes all of this possible is even more surprising, and it costs almost nothing. That part comes next. Part 2. The alchemy of waste. Your new soil. What if the most expensive material in this entire system costs less than a cup of coffee? In traditional gardening, everything begins with soil. Amending it, testing it, babying it year after year. But mushrooms do not grow in dirt. They never have. Fungi are the primary decomposers of the natural world. They thrive in substrate, organic material rich in lignin, cellulose, and hemicellulose. The fungal root network, called mycelium, breaks down this material and converts it into fruiting bodies, the mushrooms themselves. And here is the detail that turns the entire economics of this system upside down. The most productive substrates for high-yield species are agricultural byproducts that conventional operations treat as absolute waste. Cereal straw, hardwood sawdust, spent coffee grounds, cottonseed hulls, sugarcane bagasse. These materials are either free or cost pennies per pound, sourced from local farms, coffee shops, and lumber operations that are often paying to dispose of them. Trash becomes the growing medium. The growing medium becomes food. The food becomes income. A single 5-pound block of pasteurized hardwood sawdust costs approximately 30 to 80 cents to produce. That one block, properly inoculated, yields 1.5 to 2.5 pounds of oyster mushrooms across 2 to 3 harvest cycles. At $14 per pound retail, that is $21 to $35 in revenue from an 80-cent investment. Let that ratio settle for a moment. There is no other agricultural input-to-output equation that looks remotely like this. For growers looking to push yields even further, experienced cultivators rely on something called the master's mix, a formula that commercial operations have quietly optimized over years. It is a 50-50 ratio of hardwood sawdust and pelletized soy hulls. This specific combination has been shown to double the yield of many species compared to plain sawdust alone, delivering the ideal balance of carbon and nitrogen that mycelium craves. But before mycelium can colonize this substrate, the material must be prepared. Because raw substrate is a blank slate of nutrients, it is also an open invitation for competing wild molds. Contamination is the single most common reason beginners fail, and the fix is simpler than most people expect. Heat pasteurization works reliably. Bring the material to 160 degrees Fahrenheit for 1 to 2 hours, and the competition is eliminated. But there are methods that require even less effort. A cold lime bath, submerging straw in a hydrated lime solution for 2 to 4 hours, creates an alkaline environment that kills competing molds while leaving conditions perfect for mushroom mycelium. Some growers go even simpler. Cold fermentation. Submerge a bag of straw underwater for 7 to 10 days. Anaerobic organisms do the cleaning work naturally. When the substrate comes out and hits fresh air, it is primed and ready. A bag of straw, a bucket of water, a week of patience. That is it. There is a quiet lesson in this process. Every gardener accumulates what feels like waste, failed seasons, discarded plans, experiences that seemed to lead nowhere. The mushroom does something remarkable with waste. It does not discard it. It transforms it into nourishment, medicine, and value. Nothing is truly spent if someone knows how to cultivate it. The substrate is ready. But the next step eliminates the single biggest recurring cost in all of agriculture, and most beginners never discover it. Part 3. The infinite seed. In conventional farming, every season begins with a bill, seeds, seedlings, starts. Year after year, that cost never goes away. In the mycological world, the equivalent of a seed is called spawn, living mycelium colonizing a carrier like grain or sawdust. Ready-made spawn costs $5 to $20 a pound from commercial suppliers, and most beginners simply keep buying it, season after season, never realizing there is another option. Because spawn generates itself. A single culture of oyster mushroom mycelium on a petri dish can inoculate a jar of grain. That jar colonizes. 1 jar becomes 10. 10 jars become enough to inoculate hundreds of pounds of substrate. Experienced growers call this process going infinite, and once the cascade begins, the biological input cost drops to nearly zero. 1 culture, then 10, then 100, then 1,000. The math compounds in exactly the way that agriculture almost never allows. This is the laboratory phase, the brain of the operation, and the equipment needed is far less intimidating than that word suggests. A still air box is nothing more than a clear plastic storage bin with 2 armholes cut into the side. Total cost, under $40. It creates a calm, enclosed space where cultures can be transferred without contamination. As operations scale, some growers upgrade to a laminar flow hood, a device that pushes a constant stream of HEPA-filtered sterile air across the workspace. But plenty of successful operations run entirely on the $40 box. After the first 90 days, the seed cost for this system is functionally zero. Think about what that means for a moment. A single act of cultivation. 1 culture started on 1 dish multiplies without depleting itself. The supply expands the more it is shared. Mycelium is a reminder that the most valuable things in life are not consumed by giving. They are multiplied by it. The seed is ready. The substrate is waiting. But nothing happens until the right environment triggers the biology to produce. And the trigger is not what most people expect. Part 4. Simulating autumn. The environmental control. Picture a forest in late October. The air has turned cool and damp. A thin mist hangs between the trees. The temperature has dropped. The humidity has climbed. And across every fallen log and forest floor, mushrooms appear, seemingly overnight. That is not random. It is a biological response to very specific environmental triggers. When the temperature drops, when humidity rises, and when fresh oxygen floods the air, mycelium interprets those shifts as one thing. Autumn has arrived. Time to reproduce. Time to fruit. The indoor money farm recreates that exact October moment. Inside 4 walls, 12 months a year. The space can be a spare bathroom, a grow tent, a section of a basement, even a walk-in closet. The requirements are straightforward. Temperature stays between 55 and 75 degrees Fahrenheit, depending on the species. What most people would describe as pleasantly cool. Relative humidity is maintained at 85 to 95%, easily managed with a simple ultrasonic humidifier. And then there is the detail that catches most beginners off guard. Air exchange. Unlike plants, which absorb carbon dioxide, mushrooms breathe the same way humans do. They inhale oxygen and exhale carbon dioxide. If CO2 builds up in the grow space, the mushrooms suffocate, slowly. The visible sign is unmistakable. Long, stringy, desperate stems and tiny underdeveloped caps, the organism stretching and reaching for air it cannot find. Small exhaust fans running on simple timers solve this completely, cycling the air multiple times an hour. Finally, a small amount of indirect LED light, nothing more than a simulation of dappled forest canopy, tells the fruiting bodies which direction to grow. 4 elements: humidity, temperature, fresh air, light. Master those 4, and the calendar no longer matters. There is no drought to pray against, no early frost to fear, no seasonal window that opens and shuts. Production runs every single month of the year, on a schedule controlled entirely from inside the room. There is something worth noting about this biology. The mushroom does not produce its fruit during comfort. It fruits when conditions shift, when the temperature drops, when the environment changes. That trigger, that disruption, is what activates its most productive phase. The parallel to human experience writes itself. The environment is dialed in. The next decision determines whether this becomes a hobby or a genuine income stream, and it comes down to choosing the right species. Part 5. Choosing your fungal allies. Not every mushroom belongs in an indoor money farm. The species chosen is both a biological decision and a business decision, and getting it right from the start saves months of wasted effort. Start with speed, the oyster mushroom. Oysters are the undisputed starter crop for every serious indoor operation, and for good reason. They colonize fast, sometimes fully in 10 to 14 days. They tolerate a wide range of conditions. They forgive the kinds of mistakes every beginner makes. And they come in varieties that practically sell themselves at a farmer's market. The delicate pearl oyster, the dense and meaty blue oyster, the vivid pink oyster that thrives in summer heat, and the golden oyster with its rich, nutty aroma. A basket of mixed rainbow oysters on a market table draws a crowd before a single word is spoken. Now shift to the highest price point. Lion's mane. This is the mushroom that looks like a cascading waterfall of white icicles. The texture and flavor remind chefs of lobster or crab meat, making it one of the most sought-after ingredients in high-end kitchens. But the real premium comes from the wellness market. Research published in peer-reviewed journals, including the Journal of Medicinal Food, has explored its potential to promote nerve growth factor, a protein linked to cognitive function and memory support. Fresh lion's mane commands up to $30 per pound. Dried and processed into tinctures or powders, the value climbs even higher. And for growers who value reliability above all, the shiitake. Shiitakes take longer to incubate, up to 10 weeks, but they reward that patience with multiple harvests over many months. Their deep, savory umami flavor and documented heart health benefits have made them a staple across cultures. And they store beautifully, offering flexibility that faster-growing species cannot match. Every mushroom has its own timeline and its own value proposition. The oyster is fast and forgiving. The lion's mane is premium and profitable. The shiitake is patient and dependable. A smart operation grows at least 2. The species is selected. The system is built. Now comes the part that makes believers out of skeptics, watching it actually produce. Part 6. The harvest and the economics of freedom. When a fully colonized block of substrate enters the fruiting chamber, something almost surreal begins. Within 3 to 7 days, tiny clusters emerge from the surface. Growers call them pins. They are barely visible at first, small white bumps pressing outward through the substrate. And then the speed hits. Oyster mushrooms double in size every 24 hours. That is not an exaggeration. It is measurable, visible, daily growth that makes tomato plants look glacial by comparison. By day 10 to 14, full clusters are ready for harvest. The timing is precise. Pick them just before the caps begin to wave and curl upward, twisting the cluster gently away from the block. The block rests for roughly a week. Then a second flush appears, sometimes a third. After the final harvest, the spent block is not waste. It is premium, nutrient-rich compost, ready to feed vegetable beds and garden soil. A perfect closed loop. Nothing leaves the system without contributing value somewhere. Now for the numbers that turn a spare room into a genuine income source. A manageable cycle of 100 blocks per month in a single spare room translates to roughly 180 pounds of mushrooms monthly. At a blended price of $14 per pound, selling to local restaurants and at farmers markets, that is over $2,500 a month. Add a small rotation of lion's mane, and the monthly figure crosses $3,000. That is $36,000 a year from one room. Results vary with experience and market conditions, and these figures reflect established operations. But the economics consistently outperform conventional crops at any scale. scaled to a two-car garage running 500 to 1,000 blocks per month, and operations regularly report $80,000 to $200,000 in annual revenue. Because the primary input is free agricultural waste, profit margins remain remarkably high. But what makes this system particularly compelling for anyone navigating retirement or a fixed income is its resilience. When inflation drives up grain and fertilizer prices for traditional farmers, the substrate here still costs next to nothing. When energy prices climb, a well-insulated basement room barely registers on the electricity bill. During economic downturns, restaurant spending may drop, but home cooks seeking premium ingredients at farmers' markets actually increase. The system bends where others break. It is, by almost every measure, inflation-resistant and recession-resistant. And there is one more detail worth noting. In most jurisdictions, growing mushrooms indoors triggers no agricultural zoning permits, no heavy machinery requirements, and no massive land purchases. Always verify local regulations, but for the majority of growers, this system requires no permission to begin. Conclusion: the legacy of the indoor money farm. What has been laid out here is not simply an income stream, though it is a genuinely remarkable one. It is a fundamental shift in how food production and personal independence intersect. Over 2,000 years ago, a Chinese agricultural thinker named Fan Li documented systems that fed families for generations. His principle was simple: do not fight biology. Create the conditions for life to produce abundantly, and then harvest the surplus. The indoor money farm follows that exact principle. Mycelium wants to colonize. It wants to fruit. It has been doing so successfully for over 700 million years. The grower's role is simply to provide the room, the waste material, and the breath of fresh air. Imagine walking into a quiet, temperature-controlled room. The air carries the earthy scent of a forest floor after rain. Clusters of magnificent, life-sustaining food have grown overnight, silently, steadily, while the rest of the house slept. No tractor, no broken back, no weather forecast to worry about. Just observation, patience, and a partnership with one of the oldest living systems on the planet. That is the quiet kind of freedom this system offers. The biology is already waiting. The room is already there. The only question left is whether the person watching this is ready to partner with it. If someone in your life has a spare room and a willingness to learn, send them this video. The knowledge is here. The math is undeniable. Until next time, may every harvest remind you that the best things grow in the spaces most people overlook. Rooted in grace.